Hi, my name is Tamara and I'm going to present my minor investigation on language awareness in second language English learners. I'm first going to talk about the group of students that I was teaching. I'm going to present a little background on what we were working with and why. And then I'm going to explain what I focused on in my investigation and what I found after the investigation. So, for my latest VFU course, or teacher placement, I had 4 English groups in the course English 5. I did one teaching plan for the 4 weeks and I decided to follow the same plan for all of the groups. These were groups of students that generally were not very motivated for learning the theoretical subjects in school, and one of these was English. So I decided at first I needed to do something that they would appreciate and think is fun. And besides that, I knew that I needed structure. So I looked through an English book for the course and found a theme that I thought they could find interesting. The theme was fairy tales with a twist. Since most of my students were not very interested in the subject and therefore had a very low level of English, they were usually very reserved when it came to talking English. However, there was one class that was a bit more open to talking English. This was a group of 12 students. What I noticed in this class was that although the students most often got their point across, an obstacle for them very often was pronunciation. Some phonemes that I noticed that I had a hard time pronouncing were as in these words: chin, then, jeep, and tough. After noticing this, I decided that I wanted to find out whether their pronunciation difficulties had to do with them not knowing how to pronounce the different phonemes, or they simply did not know how the word they were trying to pronounce was spelled. You could sum this up into one question: were the students aware of the phonemes that they were pronouncing incorrectly? So, I made a plan on how I was going to get answers to my question. First, I chose a fairy tale that the students took turns reading aloud in class. This gave me a chance to take notes of the words the students were pronouncing incorrectly and what mistakes exactly they were making. Later, they got the task to pair up and write down a few words that they found to be difficult in the story. I collected these words and added a few more words that I noticed they had difficulties pronouncing. I made 2 exercises for the students. The first exercise was for them to practice the words. I wrote down the sentences where they had to fill in the blank spaces using the new words from the story. The words were written in Swedish in parentheses. Every student got a paper each to practice the words. When they were done, I put up the exercise on the board using the projector, and the students took turns walking up to the board and filling in the blank spaces. I asked each student to read the sentence aloud after filling in the blank. If they misspelled a word, we corrected it together, and the student was asked to read it again. The second exercise I did was to make a quiz on these words using Kahoot. I wrote the words in this quiz in Swedish, and they had to translate it into English, choosing the right option. They were given 4 alternatives, and in 3 of them the word was misspelled. This is an example of how a question on Kahoot looked like. On to the results of my investigation. These are the things that I found out. So the first thing that I found out was that when reading the story aloud, the students were usually, although not quite as often, making the same pronunciation mistakes as they did in their speech. The second thing I found out was that in the first exercise, when filling in the blanks on the board, the students sometimes misspelled the words. They often misspelled the phonemes that they could not pronounce. A third thing that I found out was that even after correcting the spelling together, the students pronounced the phonemes incorrectly more often than not. Looking at the results of the Kahoot quiz, about 30% of the questions were answered correctly by all students. About 50% of the questions were answered correctly by 2/3 of the students, and the rest of the questions had mixed answers. The point is that most students actually recognize the correct spelling of most words in the quiz. Based on the information from my results, I came to this conclusion. Since the students made the same errors when talking and when reading, it shows that they really did not know how to pronounce the phonemes, and the reason for the incorrect pronunciation was the students' unawareness of the phonemes and not the students not knowing the correct spelling. But the students often misspelled the words that they were pronouncing incorrectly, which shows that pronunciation and spelling actually go hand in hand. In order to teach the students how to pronounce phonemes correctly, we should first teach them their spelling. The students had a hard time pronouncing the phonemes even after the spelling being corrected, which makes it even clearer that they were unaware of these. In the quiz, for the most part, students actually knew the correct spelling of the words, which once again shows that the major problem with pronunciation was not the spelling, but rather unawareness of phonemes. Now, of course, there sure could be some error sources in my investigation. Some of these could be, for example, that I did this as an investigation on the whole class instead of every individual student. This could be an error source since naturally each individual student has their own pronunciation difficulties that could differ from other students. Another error source could be that the investigation was done on only 12 students and a limited number of words, which means that the results may have turned out completely different if the investigation was done on all the 4 of my English groups and on a higher number of words. A third error source could be that the students themselves got to pick out some of the words that were difficult. Maybe they would have done better if I picked all of the words. Nevertheless, I've got the answers to my questions. The students were aware of the spelling of most of the words, but they were not aware of the pronunciation of the phonemes. But the question is, why is phonemic awareness important? A study done in 1986 suggests that phonological awareness, and therefore also phonemic awareness, is the strongest predictor of reading progress, at least in the early stages of reading. There have been various later studies on this as well, stating that recognizing that words are made up of discrete sounds and that these can be changed is essential to success in learning to read. This could be an explanation to why the students in my investigation did not pronounce the words correctly, no matter if they were speaking or reading, and even when their spelling was corrected. They simply did not know how to read them, even if they did know how to spell specific words. If I were to do this investigation again, I would do it slightly differently, taking my error sources into consideration. Thank you for listening.